Okay, perfect. Great, thank you.
Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really happy to be sharing this space together and are excited to learn from these incredible creative people and wonderful speakers on speculative futures, new ways of thinking about energy, culture, and climate change. My name is Alana Dawn, and I'm the Partnerships Event Coordinator here at the U Calgary Office of Institutional Commitments, and I'm excited to host today's session, which is part of our Climate Conversation Speaker Series. In this session, we'll engage in a fascinating presentation and conversations on how speculative futures can help build just, sustainable, and healthy futures for the whole planet, and how we can start practicing it today. To start the session in a good way, I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement. The University of Calgary is located in the heart of Southern Alberta. Both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and the Kainai First Nation, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta's District 5 and 6. I share this land acknowledgement to honor and respect Indigenous cultural protocols and people who lived on this land since time immemorial, and express my gratitude to live on this land. As a settler, I acknowledge my responsibilities as a Treaty 7 person and strive for truth and reconciliation. I encourage us all to read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and the U Calgary Indigenous Strategy Tapito, and to reflect on and take action to implement these calls to action in our communities, workplaces, and advocacy efforts. Thank you. So a little bit more about our Mobilizing Alberta Climate Conversation Speaker Series. The focus is to engage in transformative conversations on climate action, learn from and share diverse perspectives and worldviews on climate action to support participants, to take action and connect with the climate action community. You can find us here on this website. Where you can learn more about, this is the 4th year we've been hosting this Climate Conversation Speaker Series, so you can see all the previous recordings. If you check out the Mobilizing Alberta web pages, you'll also find a recent e-course that's free we've created. It's called Preparing Albertans for Climate Change. And we've also funded approximately 20 climate action projects that are partnerships between U Calgary and community to meet community climate needs. So there's lots of really inspiring information you can check out there. Okay, our agenda for today, we're gonna get to meet these wonderful people who will be sharing with us about speculative futures. They will give wonderful presentations and they'll have a discussion with the moderator, and then we'll be able to engage you with the Q&A. You'll probably notice this is a webinar format, so you won't have access to your camera or to unmute yourselves, but please do submit your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Okay, I'm very happy to introduce to you all Dr. Jackie Seidel. She is Associate Professor in the Workland School of Education at the University of Calgary. Her scholarship explores interdisciplinary and existential meanings of the climate and nature crisis for teaching, learning, and curriculum, with a particular interest in how conceptualizations of time affect understandings of the work and purpose of education at all levels. Jackie seeks to integrate ecological, relational, and multi-species and pedagogical well-being throughout her academic work through arts-based and contemplative methodologies. Principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility orient her teachings and scholarship towards the right of life of humans and other species made vulnerable by violent systems. So welcome, Jackie. And I'll now introduce Dr. Kimberly Richards. Dr. Kimberly Richards is an Alberta-born scholar and dramaturg who engages performance as a vehicle for resisting extractivism, inspiring just transitions and moving through impasses. She obtained a PhD in performance studies from the University of California, Berkeley in 2019, and she was a 2021 Public Energy Humanities Postdoctoral Fellow in Transition in Energy, Culture, and Society at the University of Alberta. She is currently teaching in the School of Journalism, Writing, and Media at the University of British Columbia and is the librarian for the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters. That sounds so cool. Welcome, Kimberly. I'd like to introduce Dr. Sourayan Mookerjea. He is the director of the Intermedia Research Studio in the Department of Sociology at the University of Alberta and co-investigator of the Speculative Futures project, which also sounds amazing. This project uses research creations, practices, and strategies to imagine alternative futures of social and environmental justice beyond the crisis cycles of fossil capitals, petrocultures, and its green growth neocolonialisms. Okay, so I welcome Kim to kick us off with your presentations, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Good morning. Thank you, Alana, Dawn, and Jackie. Thank you for organizing this important series. Although I'm currently situated on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands, I was born in Secwepemc, Lethbridge. I'm an alumni of the University of Calgary's English program and Arts and Science Honors Academy, and frequently return to visit family and friends on the eastern side of the Rockies. So I'm very invested in mobilizing Alberta through climate conversation, and very happy to be in conversation with Sourayan about creative strategies to imagine alternative futures and develop skills that will help us respond responsibly to present and impending storms. Much of my research and creative practice has considered how performance practices might help us move towards and through a so-called just transition that strives to address the overlocking and intersecting emergencies of our times. Today, I'll speak from my position as the librarian of the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters. Taking inspiration from diverse futurist traditions, we operate within, across, and beyond official governmental and academic departments to create educational resources for joyful futures we could work towards. We fundamentally understand that to prepare for and survive the unfolding crises of the present, we need to expand our imagination beyond what Vandana Shiva calls the monocultures of the mind that limit our creativity and thus our capacity to adapt. This includes the overwhelming abundance of apocalyptic programming and techno-optimistic solutionism that we receive in so much of our media today. In the department, we hire artists as faculty because we believe they are essential agents of cultural change, experts in world making, and otherwise underutilized in our existing educational approaches to the future. As a librarian, I work with faculty to create the curriculum for the course, which is a part roadmap, part syllabus, that fosters a vision of the future through orienting videos, self-guided exercises, readings, and other materials. The course materials are available for free as accessible and engaging open learning resources for self-guided study, community-engaged learning, or insertion into other curriculum via our Mighty Network platform. And I'll pop that into the chat after I finish speaking. In my comments today, I'll share with you the genesis of the project in the climate art movement and introduce you to some of our existing courses as a way into a broader conversation about the value of speculative future projects in the climate and biodiversity emergency. So in 2021, I was a postdoctoral fellow of public energy humanities at the University of Alberta, affiliated with the Transition in Energy, Culture, and Society Research Network and the Departments of English and Film Studies. At the time, I was interviewing theater makers, performance artists, and social practice artists about the creative strategies they were deploying to help us move towards more sustainable energy futures. While identifying and investigating these sustainable tools for just transitions for an archival project, I also became interested in how to more effectively employ and deploy artists to mobilize public support for a just transition. What supportive structures and infrastructure would be necessary for bolstering this cultural work? In pursuing this question, I was invited to join the mission circle of Scale Lusso, Sectoral Climate Arts Leadership for the Emergency, an emerging network of artists, arts administrators, academics, and climate justice organizers working at the intersections of climate and culture in Canada. Scale was attempting to become a national hub to develop strategy, align activities, and build the leadership capacity of Canada's arts and culture sector in the climate emergency. In roundtables and working groups, organizing efforts included developing policy briefs for a green and just recovery for the sector, creating a national arts and climate strategy that embeds arts into the nation's climate goals and provides funding to do so, deliberating around an emergency mode pledge or declaration that arts organizations could sign to signal a unified commitment to climate action, rather like music declares emergency, but on a sectoral level, and artistic experiments with climate acknowledgements, which, to draw on Seth Klein's framework, would make the emergency sound and feel like an emergency. We were driven by the conviction that inclusive and far-reaching collaboration within and beyond our sector would move us towards the crucial transformational tipping points needed to shift our cultural norms from consumerism to stewardship and from extraction to regeneration in this critical decade of action. Education is, of course, a key component of this vision. I was invited to lead a working group focused on education with Ian Garrett, who is the director of the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts and an associate professor of ecological design for performance at York University. In our working group, we identified 3 levels of education to think through within training institutions like universities, within the sector, via public professional development, and through public engagement, which would use artistic approaches to enhance public education around the systems that stand in the way of building more fair, just, and sustainable worlds that we might prefer to live in and leave for future generations. We felt that the first 2 were in process, and that our task would be to develop a creative pedagogical practice that could cultivate the muscle of visions of joyful futures and offer some curriculum to help us get there. A key belief within Scale was that to move the needle on climate, we must look to artists not as agents of information attempting to raise the profile of the climate emergency, but agents of imagination, helping us explore more elusive ideas of how we exist in the world and might wish to do so differently. This framework was circulating amidst discussions of David Magg's Metcalf Foundation report, Art and the World After This, and it resonated with much of the literature by scholars and practitioners engaged in art and social change. Steve Duncombe and Steve Lambert write in The Art of Activism, the dominant system doesn't dominate because most people agree with it. It dominates because we can't imagine an alternative. One of our inspirations was the US Department of Arts and Culture, a grassroots action network inciting creativity to shape a culture of empathy, equity, and belonging. In the absence of any official department undertaking this work, the USDAC appeared. In a similar fashion, the Department of Utopian Arts and Letters performs the department that doesn't otherwise exist in current structures. And here too, we were influenced by Seth Klein's research on Canada's World War II mobilization and his observation that emergencies need new institutions to get the job done. Colleagues in local arts activist spaces were deploying similar prefigurative politics, staging a press conference 3 years into the future, which happened to be now 2025, with the Ministry of Just Transitions, and echoing other trending speculative futures produced by collaborations of artists, organizers, and politicians. At the same time as the departmental frame offers some gravitas, it felt equally important to embrace a spirit of playfulness. A core tenet in my field, performance studies, has been that make-believe makes belief. The Department of Utopian Arts and Letters is also teaching me to think differently about art and social change. Sean Ginwright, a professor of education in the Africana Studies Department at SF State, who works on African American youth activism and development, has written about letting go of myths about social change. Myth number 1, he says, is that we can fight our way to justice. The problem with terms like fight, resist, struggle, confront, or defend is that we become satisfied with strategies that may address problems, yet fail to create what we really want. In the fight for justice, he suggests a pivot from problem fixing to possibility creating, which emerges through dreaming, imagining, visualizing, and playing. Quote, by dreaming and imagining, we can move beyond simply problem fixing and see the world we want to create, rather than issues we need to eliminate. End quote. In some ways, this feels like dangerous thinking when we so desperately need policy that aligns with our climate reality. But organizers and strategists I admire continuously underscore the importance of cultivating the muscle of radical imagination needed to dream beyond fear, to cite Adrienne Marie Brown in Emergent Strategy. If we understand the climate crisis as at least in part a crisis of the imagination, we need to take seriously the work of fostering public imagination towards more just and sustainable futures. And in the department, we invoke a utopia not as a place to arrive at, but a horizon to move towards. As we developed the department, we wrote a kind of advertising brochure, and I'll read an excerpt where we identify our broad objectives. Dissociate with ways of knowing, being, sensing, and relating that are rooted in coloniality and naturalized by our existing educational systems, and experience how to know, sense, and relate otherwise. Utilize gardening skills to support a sustainable world for future generations of human beings and our non-human kin, and compost hierarchies that place humans above other than human beings. Dissect the logics of consumerism as prosperity and expansion as entitlement in a world of rapidly diminishing fossil fuel resources and increasingly precarious global supply chains. Examine personal and collective responsibilities and mechanisms for accountability, and discriminate from unaccountable and unrestricted freedoms. Develop emotional skills to face the terrifying visions of what our world will become if we fail to act. Distinguish the muscle of ambitious dreaming and existential creativity for a climate-safe future, a low-carbon world. Formulate plans to nurture your community's vision of what it will look like on the other side of the climate emergency. Cross-train to do the hard and necessary work of social transformation in ways that value Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, disabled, feminist, queer, trans, non-binary, neurodivergent, and peasant ways of being in the world. And recognize the urge to proclaim solutions, suggest quick fixes, exert moral authority, reduce complexity, hold up such ideas for deeper examination, and sit with the trouble. We know we will fail to live up to these lofty objectives despite our best intentions. The well-trod paths of our existing system will inevitably pull us back in, but we will try to learn from these failures and accept responsibility for their impacts on others and ourselves. So in the next part of my talk, I want to share with you a little bit about the 13 courses we developed in our first grant period. The project was funded by Canada Council for the Arts, and each course is now available on the Mighty Networks platform for the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts, and I'll drop that link after I finish speaking. And I'm going to begin with a course called Peasant Futurisms, Cultivating Delicious Futures, which was developed by Snida Fezic. Snida is an award-winning Bosnian-Canadian playwright, poet, writer, and scholar. She escaped the genocide of her Muslim Bosniak people and was a refugee for 5 years across 3 countries before immigrating to Canada in 1997. She is the granddaughter of Bosniak peasants on both sides of her family. The course Peasant Futurisms invites learning from peasant knowledges and practices of cooperative labor, mutual aid, subsistence farming, and self-sustainability to posit peasant futurisms as a joyful way of living locally and relationally that rejects forced ruptures from land and resists the compulsory digitization of life. Snida depicts an irresistible vision of urban living through radically relational and local ways of being, and offers guidance on how to unlearn old habits, heal our ecological connection to land, develop practical skills to build gardens, learn the basics of permaculture design, and otherwise transform capitalist cities into edible and wilder eco-cities with protected green belts and food belts rooted in circular economies, all the while challenging ourselves to become more responsible, respectful, and eco-centric citizens. A second course that I wanted to feature today is Sandra Lamouche's course, Connection to Protection. Sandra is a member of the Big Stone Cree Nation. She is a champion hoop dancer, award-winning Indigenous educational leader, and transdisciplinary storyteller and artist. In the course, she draws on hoop dance and its teachings of unity, balance, equality, resilience, and interconnectedness. And she offers directions and exercises to cultivate one's spiritual connections to land, physical connections to land, emotional connections to land, and mental connections to land. As she explains, these connections help us move to the next level of protecting the land for all of our relatives, including humans, plants, and animals, and for future generations. And then she also offers exercises for spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental ways to do that land protection work. As you can sense already, within the department, there are multiple visions of the work that we should undertake now to move towards more just, sustainable futures. Many of the courses attempt to help us navigate the challenges we face today with AI, robotics, inequality, immigration, climate changes, and rising authoritarianism through creative practices, underscoring how valuable these practices are in this critical time, even as arts and humanities programs are in crisis. Skye Projects designed a course called Telling the Story of the End of the World, which encourages learners to challenge the authority of pre-existing ideologies and invites participants to engage with new narratives. Megan Byrne offers an introduction to Utopia user experience design and foundational knowledge for designing hyper-utopias, or what is otherwise known as utopias for the people. Pulitzer Prize nominee Christina Wong guides you through her attempts to make dramatic social change in the world, failing, and then making a solo performance piece about how you tried. Her point is not to diminish the seriousness of the problems that overwhelm our world, but recognize that the ability to persevere in this fight will require creativity and a lot of coping strategies, which include humor. Other courses amplify ways of thinking undervalued in modern Western thought and mainstream education. Marilo Nunez, a Chilean-Canadian playwright and director, developed a course on slow playwriting that draws on the Chilean arpillera tradition used by women during the dictatorship to depict and share news of the political violence as a strategy for developing story in community. Nazli Akhtari's course, Critical Cat Studies, offers guidance on how to learn with cats in ways that blur Euro-American-centric ways of knowing. Movedic's course, Unsustainable Utopias, draws on their lessons learned during their participation in a range of utopian efforts to promote sustainable living and explores failed utopias across time and cultures so as to learn significant lessons from their failures and their transitions into cults, militias, and closed communities. Julia Havard developed a course on Crypt Glam, spells of everyday disability activism, and Aisha Leslie Bentham launched her school, Gian Nativa, School of Conjuring, with a course on cookery and intergenerational codes of memory. So we have a very diverse range of faculty and a diverse range of courses that they've developed, all of which offer really kind of fascinating skills and educational resources that are widely available. I'm going to stop presenting at this point, and I'll certainly encourage you to sign up for access to these materials. And also, I'd love to chat more with anyone about how to really activate these courses in different kinds of ways. Thanks for now.
Thank you, Kim. Sorry, Sourayan, are you
Yeah.
ready? Okay.
I'm
Thanks.
ready.
While you pull up your slideshow, Kim, we had one question around which program, like when you listed all the objectives that you went through, is that for your overall department?
Yes, exactly.
Thanks.
So that was a very broad kind of vision that we had of what we're hoping that the department is kind of going to help us move towards. Yep. And the courses themselves each have more precise learning objectives of what they're working towards accomplish.
Thanks. Okay, over to you, Sourayan.
All right. Well, many thanks, Alana Dawn, for inviting me to this exciting series. I'm really thrilled to be on this panel with Kimberly and Jackie. And also thanks to the audience for being here. I'm speaking to you from Amesquatchie-Waskagan Treaty 6 territory, also known as Edmonton, where I reside as a grateful guest. And for this land acknowledgement, I want to give a shout out to these two must-read publications addressing issues central to this presentation. The Just Transition Guide by Melina Labucan Massimo from Sacred Earth Solar is simply one of the best renewable energy transition guides for communities that I've ever read. It's both very practical and astute politically. And The End of This World by Angela Luck and her colleagues is, in my view, one of the most important books on the climate crisis in so-called Canada. And I'll be building on some of its arguments in my presentation. In order to introduce and contextualize the work I'll be presenting today, I want to begin by drawing a distinction between three forms of speculation which oriented my collaboration in the Speculative Energy Futures project. Financial speculation is, of course, the most commonly acknowledged form of speculation, but this is merely the extension of a historically specific form of political economic power that I call Herculean power, where those who are powerful and wealthy inflate their superfluous wealth by hedging risk. This is, of course, the weakest form of speculation, though a violent one, since other people are made to pay for the cost of money getting more money through apparent wizardry. So this is really a useful model for us at all. Romantic speculation is essentially the closed loop of subjective fantasy involving consciousness and imagination, which in our contemporary society of the spectacle is heavily socially engineered by mass media and mass consumption. This is also a relatively weak form of speculation, even though it is ubiquitous, and this kind of speculation therefore forms the raw materials for any genuine form of popular culture that might be able to break free from oligarchic manipulation. Nowadays, there's a lot of discussion about how our social media environments trap people in their own bubbles, and this alienation of popular communicability is certainly a big problem. But it is a big problem because this kind of bubble formation is not totally new, and North American society has been producing such bubbles since the dawn of cheap oil, and especially since the beginning of the plastic age. Regenerative speculation is a form of poesis, meaning-making, predicated on a transformation mediated by the otherness of others. Now, to make this rather abstruse definition somewhat more concrete, consider the power of what the best works of literature or theater or cinema or those courses that Kimberly was showing us today, what they can do. One does not merely identify with characters, but this identification moves you to reflect on your own point of view, on your own situation in the world, through the framework of some other character's point of view and experience. For me, this is an ideal for what research creation strives to do, where research and creation have equal roles to play. Now, I'm not saying that this is what we actually achieved in our Speculative Energy Futures project. All that remains to be seen, but it is the bar that I set for myself. With regard to energy systems change, one example of such a historically alternative perspective is that of the Assembly of Indigenous Peoples of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. They're demanding, among many things, a new international economic order, a politics that is not America first or Canada first, but rather planet and people first, and they're calling for us to organize regional anti-COPs. They're calling for systemic transformation, which goes beyond merely replacing combustion engines with electric motors. By defending their land and their water, they're calling for an end to continually growing the economy, which accelerates both material throughput and energy consumption, primarily by the wealthy. There are then 4 speculative themes regarding energy transition which emerge from the situations and perspectives of Indigenous peoples, and those of common people in the global south, not the elites, but ordinary common people. These four themes are delink, degrow, decommodify, decolonize. Given the turmoil of the last several weeks, it's useful to make a few observations regarding the political chaos in the United States in order to contextualize these speculative themes of systemic energy transition. First of all, Trumpism in the US is a symptom of the unraveling not only of globalization and the post-Cold War Washington consensus, but of the entire post-Second World War, Cold War neocolonial system of Pax Americana as well. We have truly gone through the portals and are entering a world order that is radically new in some way. So some Canadians might be shocked that Trump is threatening us, an old friend, with tariffs, and that for him, annexation is a real thing. But in another way, this is not so new. For this is precisely what the US-led system has been doing to many countries in the global south, especially since the 1980s, the so-called lost decade of development, with so-called structural adjustment policies which compromise the sovereignty of these countries through the mechanisms of debt and trade policy. Canada has been complicit in this, and we have benefited from the access to cheap labor and resources elsewhere. So the current US aggression and contempt for sovereignty is also not totally new. But what has to be emphasized here is that this phenomena will not just fade away by itself after the next 4 years. Trump-style racist nationalism will keep returning so long as the processes driving fascism redux are not abolished. Trump's tariff and annexation threats has spurred Canadian nationalism, to be sure. But there will be many different and conflicting kinds of Canadian nationalism, and everything depends on what kind of nationalism prevails. In any case, the point that I'm making here is these four energy transition themes need to be understood in relation to this fluid, volatile, and unpredictable geopolitical economic situation we find ourselves in. The very depths of the existential threat to humanity makes deep systemic change more possible than ever. The point is to organize for it. Now, getting to the Speculative Energy Futures project and the Energy Repair Kit. The Energy Emergency Repair Kit is one of 11 projects created by this larger research creation team, Speculative Energy Futures, led by my colleagues Sheena Wilson and Natalie Lovelace here at the University of Alberta. Not everyone on that team is in this photo of us presenting our work at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. This is the Energy Emergency Repair Kit that I'm going to be talking about, as well as the list of the artists and researchers who collaborated on this. I will present just a few excerpts from this kit, particularly from the repair manual you see in the binder. There's a lot going on in this kit, but I'm only presenting a few pages of very, very small and tiny tastes. But two further observations about how this energy emergency repair kit puts a twist on that third type of speculation, regenerative speculation, I mentioned earlier. First, this project of regeneration is speculative in the sense that the four themes we'll be exploring need to take the form of popular culture, and yet this is something by definition scholarly research cannot socially engineer. So this makes our work speculative and not solutionist. But secondly, the repair kit is also speculative insofar as we ask, what would happen if we take mycelium as both our model and our muse for understanding what an energy system based on the singularity of the history of life on Earth might be? Mycelium are fungal networks in the soil mediating between life and death, making forests a communication and energy system which transforms the gift of sunshine into the planetary biosphere, our first and final and only home. So the question of delinking returns as globalization begins to fall apart. A return to the neocolonial world order of Pax Americana that has existed since the end of the Second World War is both impossible and unsustainable with respect to environmental crises, climate crises, and the deepening divide of social inequality of every kind. Remember that the very depth of the existential threat to humanity makes deep systemic change more possible than ever. So we sound the alarm regarding 4 contemporary frequencies of energy emergency communication because it strikes us as odd that on the one hand, the climate justice movement shouts emergency. On the other hand, it calls for the most minimal changes: solar panels, windmills, electrical vehicles, carbon markets, and other techno fixes that seem like more greenwashing to us. So let's face it, the climate justice movement has faced a major defeat as the US pulls out of COP and goes drill, baby, drill. Time then to rethink things from the mycelium muddied ground up. Time then to heed La Asamblea's call to organize regional anti-COPs. While it makes intuitive sense that an infinitely growing economy on a finite planet cannot possibly be sustainable, there is much more to this idea of degrowth. Contrary to the official histories, degrowth has filamentary networks and sporadic sources in the subsistence perspective ecofeminism invented by the Global South, especially in Latin America and India. It's time to stop listening to economists who misunderstand everything when they tell us that the capitalist economy is the one and only possible economy, an eternal economy, because there are at least 2 economies existing in the world today. There is the status economy that serves war and depends on war, and this economy needs to shrink. This war-dependent status economy needs to shrink especially because it dumps all of its problems that it creates onto another economy, a marginalized economy, a subterranean economy, a household-centered economy, a feminist economy which serves life and depends on life, and this economy needs to regenerate. In the kind of economic system we live in currently, not only does the system need to consume way more energy than it needed the previous day, not only does growth depend on growing war-making capacity, but the system serves human needs poorly and inconsistently and partially, and only as an afterthought to turning a determinate quantity of money into a larger quantity of money by dumping violence and toxins onto households. The kind of global market we now depend on and is in turmoil, on the brink of falling apart, is not prescribed to us by the laws of nature. Rather, it is a historically specific institution imposed on the world by colonizers. Far from being an instrument for allocating resources efficiently, it is in actual fact an institution through which power is exercised in many different ways. For most of human history, human beings have relied on radically different institutions of distribution based on the reciprocity of gift exchange. One pervasive feature of mass commodity markets is that, left to themselves, they make the wealthy wealthier and the poor poorer over time. The wealthy, moreover, consume way more energy than everyone else. So the most important and urgent step for energy system change is not flooding the market with Elon Musk's products, not producing more energy for export, but rather reducing social inequality both within Canada and in the world. Certainly, there can be no just energy transition without decommodifying energy so that we can ensure that everyone has an equal right to energy and the world's wealthy cannot hoard and waste energy. Indigenous peoples have been asking settler neocolonial Canada to decolonize, and we are lucky that so far they have been asking us to do this very politely. So it's high time for the Canadian climate justice movement and the labour movement to stop pretending to be allies and take this issue seriously. In Canada, delinking, degrowing, and decommodifying is impossible without decolonization. And this is because decolonization is impossible without delinking, degrowing, and decommodifying. As long as Canada remains a satellite of a neocolonial world order on a global scale, it cannot stop dispossessing Indigenous peoples, accelerating environmental destruction, creating ever more high-entropy techno-wastelands, and intensifying planetary toxification. What is needed urgently, then, is far more than the minor rejigging of interprovincial trade barriers and the dismantling of alcohol monopolies. In this new era of existential crises, we need to return to the tradition of our treaties and redo Confederation in a non-racist way, where Canada and sovereign Indigenous peoples establish a new constitutional framework of mutual aid, friendship, and peace. And that's it for me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Kimberly and Sourayan. Lots to think about here. Just so to remind the audience that we're going to have a conversation between the three of us and then open up for audience questions. So if you start to have questions, you can pop those into the Q&A anytime, and we'll get to those after our conversation. Yeah, so as a scholar in education of mostly K-12, so our work with the young, with children in this world, I spend a lot of time thinking about these topics and how education at all levels, including post-secondary, is so complicit in the destructive systems that we're in, and on every level in settler colonial capitalism. And historically, education was emergent out of the industrial colonial capitalist project and meant to serve that. And the timeline of it as well, and how it imagines the future and what a system this is to be caught inside as people trying to do education and do it differently. And Kimberly and I were talking before the session about how difficult it is to imagine anything else. And I'm working on a little project right now for a paper I have to give get to give next week that includes images of education from fiction and film. And even in the future, or in complete apocalypse, in some of these versions of our storytelling, education often looks exactly the same as it looks now. Even 300 years in the future in Star Trek, the schools look like now. Even as the world falls apart, even if it's being attacked by aliens, people find a way to do education that looks exactly the same. And in education, there's scholarship for 120 years, well, much more than that back many, many centuries, but really since this educational project began, so many scholars have tried to reimagine what education could look like. And sometimes it gets enacted for a little while, but this big system is very tight in its ideas about what teaching and learning are, what it means to be a human being, and especially what the future looks like. And so I was just thinking this morning, and as both of you were talking about this word speculative and what a wonderful invitational adjective it can be, and how necessary, especially even more in the last few weeks with what is going on, but that has a long historical arc that's led us to here. And the invitation to ponder and contemplate together and on our own to imagine other possibilities beyond the future fantasy of colonial capitalism that promises either a totally fantasy imaginary future that's always better than our present moment, but it's never going to arrive, while simultaneously projecting apocalyptic visions predicating the end of life itself. And so speculating in the way that both of you have talked about provides openings for other possibilities and imagining and seeing otherwise. And one of the great influential educational philosophers of the 20th century, for me at least, but for many, many people, is Maxine Greene, who taught at Columbia. And her work focused on the importance of the social imagination, and always with educators, encouraging us to remember that our work with children, or in our case in higher ed with our students, could always be otherwise, but reminding us that this kind of imagining must be situated in the present realities and historical circumstances, and not in the future fantasies of the current economic and political orders that have wrought so much destruction on life itself. And these present realities do often feel like enclosures and foreclosures that suck up a lot of our energy and our ability to imagine what's possible. And so they start to feel smaller and even less possible. So I really felt that today's presentations were a gift for this work of speculating possibilities prompted out of our present and historical situation. So thank you so much to both of you for so graciously accepting our invitation to come and talk with us today. And I don't know, I was like, so many questions myself to ask you, but maybe we could just start on thinking, maybe each of you, on a response to one another's presentation, or questions you might have for each other, or the synergies and questions you see between one another's work. And I don't know who wants to start, but just a bit of reflection on what come out of our presentations today.
Sure, I'll go ahead. I mean, I love the work that you presented, and I'm really excited about looking it up more closely, kind of thing. It seems to me that there's a lot of synergies. I think that what we tried to do in Speculative Energy Futures were similar in a number of different ways. We didn't necessarily use the framework of courses, like a kind of syllabus kind of thing. And there's been some really interesting work that people have been doing on making syllabi available to the world in various kinds of ways. I don't know if you folks know about the pirate care syllabus, for example. And there's been things on I'm forgetting the place in the States, but it was part of the Black Lives Matters movement, and Ferguson, the syllabus all on Ferguson. I think that's a great framework in that kind of way, and I'd love to kind of partner with you guys in some kind of way, and see ways of doing more of this kind of work, because it is very, very important. We feel very frustrated here at the U of A in terms of the kind of tight, small box in which pedagogy and courses and programs on these crises are happening. There's not a lot of room for the kind of work that Kimberly and her colleagues and friends are doing there. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. A couple of thoughts. One is, I mean, yeah, wonderful to do more collaboration. There's so much synergy here. I was noting in the languaging in some of the excerpts that you shared on the screens, just the kind of like the confidence of this kind of score or instruction guide kind of informed writing that is like refreshing, and it feels so doable, which is part of the fun, right? It's these very concrete steps to do something that is nevertheless, can be quite fantastic too. But I was enjoying seeing that language, and there's a lot of similarities, I think, in the kind of syllabus projects where it's like, this is the directive, go knock on the door and meet your neighbors and invite them to dinner and like start to talk about how you can, share resources a little differently, those kinds of things. And on that latter point about the challenges within the university context in which we both are working, and there's a couple of comments I'm seeing in the questions as well that this brought up for me, and one was about just the circulation of the project. And Ian's helpfully pointed out, yes, for us, this was a project that was by the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts. So it exists really outside of any academic structures, although I work within a university, and some of the faculty who we hired also have, forays in higher education as well. The courses are so clearly not the kind of courses that are going to be offered in our departments. And so it exists in the arts and culture sector as, a project of the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts. But I'm curious too about kind of how you're mobilizing, circulating your kit.
Sure. Well, that's I mean, people may be interested in, so this is a good question. I personally don't actually know at the moment because it's the larger team that's organizing the how there's 11 projects, and they're all part of something called a flux kit. So they'll all be in something that kind of looks, I did see, like we've now got the flux kit sort of put together. So there's it looks like a big suitcase, and there's 11 different projects in it. They are educational in the sense that they're meant to be taken out and you just kind of spend time with whatever craziness they're doing in various kinds of ways, right? And now my colleagues, Sheena Wilson and Natalie Lovelace, are going to be setting up some kind of infrastructural system for these things to circulate. I think it'll be, I don't know if it'll involve the U of A library system, for example, but that might be a certain way of doing it. But I think the basic idea is that people can request to borrow them, and then they'll circulate out in that kind of way. If folks are interested, there is a website called justpowers.ca. I'll try to put that in the chat. I'm not good at chat, but anyway, I'll try it anyway. Can't spell Just Powers here. .ca. There we go. If folks are interested, that's a website that is the kind of overarching website for a number of projects, Speculative Energy Futures, but also another one called Feminist Energy Futures, and a range of things that Sheena Wilson in particular has been kind of directing. So that would be the place to check for updates, and that would be also the place, I mean, I guess you could email me or email my colleague Sheena to find out how these things will be available. But there is a plan in place to make them available.
I have a question for both of you, thinking about your presentations, the projects you did. So these are, you engage in really what we might call speculative methodologies as well, that are like playful, emergent, creative, and actually very joyful in a time where sometimes it's right now difficult to find joy. I actually had several of my elderly friends and relatives the last few weeks talk about like they feel hopeless about the prospects for future generations, knowing that like they're coming to the end of their own life here, and kind of worried about what's coming for their descendants and all the children who are to come. So I think could you take a moment and reflect on these kind of methodologies and what they bring and give us through working on these kind of projects, that other people might think about how we might do that in our own work, wherever the audience is in their own teaching and their learning and their community work. I can see there's a lot of people from the community here today as well doing this kind of work. So do you have any advice or thoughts on kind of these speculative methods to hold us in space and time?
Kimberly, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm just kind of running through all of the courses because I think that they take a number of different approaches to planting joy and engaging joy in their work. Certainly, Christina Wong's course is one that comes to mind, where it's very humorful and also encouraging us to lean into the storytelling around our failures, but also what lessons we learn, and to share that and to do so. And but I think all of the courses are really invested in the kind of sharing stories and with community in a different kinds of ways. It could be neighbors, it could be other kind of chosen companions. Often we encourage the faculty to think creatively about like who they could meet in office hours, like who to seek wisdom from within the context of the challenges they might face as they're trying to develop these skills to face the future. And they do so in, pretty creative ways. So I think that just those invitations to then, I think, differently out of the box and share what we're going through in the process comes up a number of times in those projects. And I don't know if that's exactly about the hopelessness, but there's so many traditions of that are being invoked within these courses that have, deep histories of long-lasting struggles. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in re-engaging those kind of bodies of knowledge.
Yeah, I guess in terms of that, I think there's maybe two things that I could say in terms of why, in particular, creative methods, the world of contemporary critical art, for example, particularly as a sociologist, why I think this is really important, but important in the sense that you've raised, Jackie, in terms of education and in terms of how all of us are going to deal with the present that we're stuck in and all of its dangers, I guess. I mean, this is even when I teach courses here at the U of A, I find myself having to really take a moment in the midst of a lecture kind of thing and say, I have to be mindful about how doom and gloom I'm going to be with in terms of talking about things with young people that are my students and all of that. And I think that for me, why the creative processes, the world of contemporary critical art and so on is so important and valuable. There's two things. One is the fact that communication and human meaning making. If people know the work of the American linguist Noam Chomsky, one of the things that Chomsky, the implication of Chomsky's work is that the human need to communicate and find a world that's meaningful is really a force of nature, right? He talks about this as being a kind of evolutionary endowment. This is something that we share with all other forms of life in that kind of way. So you are dealing with something that is in that completely different kind of way from all of the ways in which we think about power in terms of military power, technology, and so on and so forth, is a different kind of power and all that in that regard, right? And that, it's irrepressible for human beings to try and communicate in meaningful ways, not the kind of crappy stuff that, official politics and university administrators and all of these other people who speak in the way in Orwellian language, right? Like as George Orwell showed us so well so long ago, kind of thing. So that's one thing. And then the other aspect of it is, I think, and this is a lesson that I've learned from two Canadian scholars, Harold Innes and Marshall McLuhan. And one of the things that Innes has taught me anyways, that to think about communication, you can think about that in terms of two different axes of space bias and time bias and so on. But the key thing that he's kind of drawing to our attention is that a lot of meaning making and a lot of art and culture, for example, that these are forms of technology on the one hand, but that they require a different relationship to time. That is to say, nobody could sing a song if human beings hadn't been singing songs for millennia, kind of thing. No melody is possible without people creating melodies in the past, and that goes for every form of art in that kind of way. To play a violin, you need 10 years of practicing and so on and so forth, right? So the thing is that I think that if you create a very rich environment of a certain kind that involves what McLuhan talks about as this involvement in depth, and it puts you into a different timeline altogether, right? That the present that we're locked into is no longer the only possible time in that regard. And I think that those two things, the fact that creative work really puts us in a different kind of temporal relationship, as well as the power, the natural power. I mean, it's, saying a word is like a lightning strike in that kind of way, right? That these are the really the important things about why this kind of work matters so much. The worse the world gets in various kinds of ways.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to some of the audience questions now. So I'll go over here and read some of them out. Thank you, Marianne. So how can we point to a different form of growth, such as growth being fully human, not reduced to used objects in the service of profits? Growth being fully human, not reduced to used objects in the service of profit.
I guess maybe that's a question for me, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Well, yes, there's two eco-feminist social scientists, Maria Mies and Veronica Benholt-Thompson, who talked about it this way, that there's a kind of economy that human beings have always had and have always depended upon, and that exists to this day, which is an economy in which everything that's produced and the way we produce things and so on is meant to immediately serve the needs of life and the intergenerational reproduction of households, right? And that this is completely different from an economic system that first has to turn a quantity of money into a larger quantity of money, and then maybe it'll get around to meeting household needs and so on and so forth. But the primary objective of how institutions are set up, how banking, finance, politics, how everything else works, is to take quantities of money and turn it into larger quantities of money in that regard. So the thing about it is that there's a lot of things in our society that do need to grow and have more time, energy, and resources invested in it. Education being one of them, healthcare being another, the care for the elderly, the care for the sick. There's lots of things that human beings would love to spend their time, and that would make their work much more meaningful and more important if they were actually doing things that were useful for the world and that was regenerating the planet and our relationship with it, right? So that I see as this other possibility that exists already in our world, because our world would not exist at all if all of that kind of care economy wasn't already an important part of it. This is the important thing in that regard. So it's really a question of finding the political means by which people can do what they already know how to do and want to do anyway, and get rid of all of this other stuff that, a new space mission to the, past the moon or whatever, like who needs that? That is like nobody wants that except for 10 people, right? 10 men, put it this way.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Sean has a question. Oh, it's like a dissemination question. This is a good question. How do you imagine disseminating these utopian reimaginings, engaging with the public that is generally entrenched in old paradigms or not accustomed to interacting with creative and speculative works?
This is a good question, and it's one that I'm trying to actively think through, and also, would love, additional ideas in thinking through. The position I have is called a librarian, in part because we flagged the libraries are one of the very few places in which resources for dreaming, for information, for developing new skills, as also it's one of the few places in which we still have that is a free space. People can go and access those things, and we want to kind of, I think through more possibilities in how to function like a library, to maybe partner with libraries, to do that kind of activity, because it feels like there's a potential kind of synergy there. And so certainly in this kind of first granting cycle, we really had to spend the majority of our time in creating these resources. And then the dissemination part is still one that I'm really trying to actively work on. And we haven't even yet had a real launch event for all of the courses yet. And so that will be part of it, but also being in conversation through the kind of networks that were established through Scale and through our other kind of climate arts partners beyond also the Scale network are some of the strategies that we're thinking about. But it's a really good question, and I don't think that I fully have the answer yet of how to disseminate these kinds of reimaginings, because to really do that requires something maybe a bit different from what we have the networks yet to do.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question, and it's also not one that I necessarily have all the answers to, kind of thing. But there's, I mean, one aspect of course, because I teach at a university and so on, and I can certainly say that education has a huge, important role to play in all of this. Certainly, it's my experience that young people today, students, are deeply interested in these issues and are greatly concerned with them and so on. And from the point of view of a university educator, or maybe an educator at another at other levels and so on, I think that it is a big responsibility for us to not set people up with totally unrealistic and false expectations and hopes for the future, right? So that's a major one. And in terms of the ways in which our society is always, in this kind of, we've turned education into a credentialization machine, and it's all about these jobs of the future and all of that kind of stuff. Well, the contemporary capitalist economy doesn't know how to create jobs and is incapable of doing that. So that's a first thing there in terms of, why should people come to university, for example? Well, stop with this myth in that regard, right? Now, the other thing, education is important, but the other thing that is really important in terms of my situation in all of this is that, I mean, there is a kind of tradition in the social sciences in particular, where social scientists sort of set themselves up as being, we're the experts that are going to fix other people. Other people all have problems of various kinds, and we come in with these solutions and we fix people and so on. Well, a lot of the politics in the world happening right now is because people are fed up with highfalutin, pretentious experts trying to fix them in that kind of way. So for me, it's a really important point of departure that that the work that I do is not about telling other people what to think, how to live, or any of these kinds of things, but to create materials and environments that they can spend a bit of time in, where they can come up with their own way of understanding their world and their own situation and so on. And I think it's really important for the kind of work the creative work that we've been doing in speculative energy futures and so on, is to really think about this in relationship to social movements, and how social movements, how they relate to their constituencies and their publics and so on, because that's where a different kind of education happens as well, and people teach themselves and each other, and it's not some prof like me, telling you how to live your life. I don't want to do that at all.
Thank you. Maybe that kind of answered Sean's question. It's a little further down too about what can universities do to transform the way we relate to society. But there's a question from Don here. It's really interesting given what's going on, especially in the US, with the attempted erasure of like actual language, words, concepts out of the public imagination on purpose. So Don said, I get the sense that a large portion of the Canadian population, or maybe beyond Canada, lump climate change together with DEI, gender equality, and other so-called woke issues, and consequently dismiss it all. Is this a fair assessment? It's a question also about human rights, the rights of nature to me. But does one of you want to speak to this and to what's going on with this? Is like exactly the space that I think a lot of this work is speaking directly into.
Kimberly, do you want to go first, or?
I don't think I have an answer kind of straight onto that question, but something that comes up to me is also the kind of reimagining of what we think of as a climate project, whether that be within a research framing or in a kind of job framing, or some other kind of project. It's that, many of the courses in our catalog don't really even use the language of climate emergency or ecological emergency, and yet the kinds of relational skills that they're trying to cultivate, the kinds of creative capacities they're trying to cultivate are ones that nevertheless support us to undermine some of the systems that are in place that have led us to the climate crisis. And so I think in a similar way, as we understand all of the climate crisis work as being so very intersectional, so too do a lot of the kind of roles that we can play individually and collectively, is that there's many, many ways that we're doing climate work through healthcare, through education, through creative work, even when it may not be as legible for that. So that's a very backward way to start to talk to that question, but it was something that kind of came to mind.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts about that question would be that, I'm not so sure actually how big that support for all of that stuff is, right? I think that in the case of Canada in particular, that yes, the current Conservative Party and so on has been trying to ride the Trump tiger and then wrap it in the Canadian flag and see if they can get a majority government in that kind of way. And that's been a very dangerous game, and how that will turn out now is, I think, pretty much up in the air. But I think that Canadians and then people elsewhere in the world, and probably even Americans, I mean, I don't think people are really, really upset about wokeism and about, all of these things, that these demons that the right is now creating and telling us to be, that this is the end of all merit and so on, unless we, stop people from celebrating Martin Luther King Day. I mean, so I have a feeling that this is, in that respect, kind of a thing that will begin to crumble under its own weight in other kinds of ways. But of course, it'll keep coming back at the same time in new forms all the time, as long as this kind of the larger problem in the world, I think, is really social inequality, this concentration of power and wealth that we have never had in human history ever before, that we have. There's huge amounts of completely unaccountable money that a few people can now control and buy whatever it is they need, including weapons and so on, that is a huge, huge danger and problem in that kind of way. So they will always try to manipulate people who are vulnerable in various kinds of ways. So this is where, again, where I think that politics and movements and education become super important, that we have to shift gears from what we have been doing. You know, the Trudeau government, for example, you know, just before the pandemic, there was this kind of effervescence of climate justice activism in Canada and so on, and that folks might still remember. I barely remember anything before the pandemic, but remember bits of that. And the Trudeau government has actually spent a huge amounts of money on climate action related and climate adaptation related kinds of programs and so on and so forth, which are all now, you know, in danger of being taken apart. But this has been totally contradictory, because at the same time they've been funding the oil industries to, you know, almost like $50 billion over the last 6 years and so on, right? So we have this major kind of contradiction, because our governments have been really think about energy only in terms of it being just another export commodity, and that the whole point is to produce as much energy as possible to export. That is the plan, and that's, you know, that's a problem in that regard, because we're not doing the climate action kind of stuff in a smart way as a result of it. But I think the Trudeau government has been doing this because they know that Canadians really want to see their government do meaningful things in terms of these issues, and they're not worried about wokeism in that kind of way.
Yeah, I think about that question a lot. So I was really grateful that somebody asked it, and it's something really, it's challenging to talk about because they're all interrelated, but also I spent a lot of time reading that data, and none of it shows that there's a majority of people against this, but it starts to sound like it in these like echo chambers and in the media and all these things that Sourayan was talking about at the beginning of his presentation. And that can become very loud. So I love that page that you showed in the Energy Emergency Repair Kit. I do really encourage people to get a copy of it. That was like, be quiet, like shh, and like stop talking and stop responding, because there's strategies that we can use to take out some of the noise that's around us so that we can think better and create better and be together in better ways. Otherwise, yeah, it's really exhausting. So, okay. Sunita asked this question: how do we think about decolonization in terms of Eve Tax and Wayne Yang's decolonization is not a metaphor, which insists that decolonization is about land, returning stolen land, and not about decolonizing education, which forgets the land? It's a really important question. Yeah. The system of education we're in is about forgetting a lot of things and ignoring a lot of things to keep itself going, just like the economy. So I don't know which of you has maybe some comments about that question.
Yeah, I think that some of the courses speak to that, including Sandra Lemouche's course on From Connection to Protection, which is, you know, we create little course codes, and the course code for her class is Land Back, because it's really about land relations in significant ways. But it also takes the approach that there's work we need to do in helping us get to that potential future. So maybe that's the future we're moving towards, and maybe we could think of it being very simple, like maybe, yeah, okay, land back, here we go. But actually, maybe there's also a lot of steps in the process of helping us to get there. And Tuck and Yang would say that's an excuse, and it's holding us up, and it's not actually the work of decolonization. And that's a really important like perspective to always be holding. So I love when the work is centered and we're faced with it, because it really challenges us to assess like, what are we doing and what might we do in a more impactful way. But yeah, at the same time, I think that there's some valuable steps in this kind of developing the relationships to land on multiple levels, so that then we're able to protect it and move forward in a different kind of set of ways.
Yeah, for that question, I mean, I understand that quote from Tuck Yang to mean that decolonization is about a politics, not just a rhetorical term. And I guess in terms of the work that we did with the energy emergency repair kit, and more generally, I guess throughout speculative energy futures as well, was really to try and connect what we were doing in these projects in relationship to thinking through the politics of not just energy transition, but the politics that we're embedded in our lives here in Turtle Island, in that kind of way. So it's through that process that I would say, I mean, to be very concrete about it, I think that land back means a constitutional convention. It means like revisiting Confederation and redrawing our Constitution in a way that is not this racist document that kind of ignores Indigenous people altogether, kind of thing, right? If you look at that history of how it is that the Canadian state emerged out of the conflicts between these various empires on the one hand and Indigenous people here in the other, there's a whole historical tradition of treaties and treaty making that was part of it, right? And our ever since the Calder decision, the Canadian state has to, I mean, we have a weird kind of colonialism here in Canada. It's like a constitutionally self-limited form of colonialism, right? That the Canadian government does all of this sort of song and dance stuff with Indigenous people because it's constitutionally obligated to do so ever since the Calder decision. And yet at the same time, what it's doing is continuing to dispossess Indigenous people of their land and of their resources and so on, right? So land back, there's no other form that land back can possibly take other than for us to have a different confederation altogether with Indigenous sovereign nations being part of it in relationship with what might, my personal thoughts is let's get rid of the provinces. They're just a superfluous layer of nepotism. But, it's not up to me. It's up to Canadians to decide what that will look like, kind of thing. But that's how I would approach this, I guess.
Thank you so much. We have time, I think, for one more question before our closing. And Jack asks, it's like a very interesting question. Thank you for the great presentation. Are there any tips or suggestions on how to encourage uptake of this speculative methodology for outcomes in courses that we see as the bastion of traditional thinking, such as economics, finance, or engineering?
I love that question too, and I want to.
All of us are like in the humanities, art, social sciences, so it is a very interesting and challenging question.
In my position at UBC, I teach a number of writing classes that often are designed to help students learn research skills and write then in academic genres. And we do so in relation to a interdisciplinary theme. And last summer, I taught a new section on futurisms and was teaching predominantly STEM students and kind of opened the door for them to draw on both their disciplinary knowledges, but also start to think through kind of futuristic problems that their disciplines are interested in engaging. And it was fascinating. It was just so fascinating to see what students were drawn towards. And what was very interesting to me was how complex the projects were that they were envisioning, even as essentially first-year students who don't have yet a lot of training within these kind of programmings, but they were, asking questions about really complex phenomenons of global supply chains in relation to pandemics and future thinking around those kinds of things. And so I don't have a great answer, but I think even just opening the door towards futurisms as it is being thought within those fields may be an initial step and open up some really fascinating kinds of possibilities.
Yeah, I would say that in our experience, we on our research team, we had one engineer, a water engineer that was involved in the project. We tried to have more people involved, but people in the engineering side anyway, there wasn't a lot of interest, though students and grad students in particular were very interested in what we were doing. And also when we presented our work in Switzerland, that was actually in the context of most of the students we presented our work to were this was a finance program, and they were learning how to do climate finance. Basically, that's what that program was about. And so it was like sticking our heads into the lion's den in a certain kind of way. But students were really, really opened up and engaged with what it is that we were trying to do. So there was a lot of interest, and I think they had a great time in working on projects with us in that regard. But I would say that, you know, at a deeper level, what we really need to do is, like, why do we have this division between the sciences, engineers, social sciences, and humanities? I mean, all of that dates from a world that no longer exists, and it makes no sense now for us to be you know, Jackie was talking about how we imagine education in the future, right? I mean, it makes no sense for us to have these silos, and the U of A is one of the worst siloed places I've ever seen, man. It's insane here, but there's no need for it. I think we got to design other kinds of universities altogether.
Yeah, I hope so too. That sounds like that's the way to end this world, for this world to end. That's also an excellent book. Thank you for bringing that book up. If people haven't read that, I've been using that as a course text as well. And it's really challenging and interesting for people to read. So I'm going to pass this back to Alana Dawn to close our session today. Thank you to both of you for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you all of you for this. Thanks. And thanks to the audience too.
Yeah, I just wanted to again say a heartfelt thank you to all the speakers, to you, Jackie, and everyone attending. I loved seeing all the hand claps and hearts. It was kind of really inspiring to hear your creativity and all those broader questions you're asking us to reflect on beyond current limitations in our systems. I really value, so that we can really think through what is that joyful future that we are working towards and we also desperately want. So thank you all so much for your work in creating those spaces for people every day. Really appreciate it. Yeah, that's just kind of my wrap up. Where people have to go, feel free, you can go. I do have a slide. We talked about kind of grief, or like kind of those deep emotions that might come up around these topics. So I do have some resources I can share with people who are still in attendance. I'll just quickly pop up on my slide. And again, thanks for all the great resources, Kimberly and Sourayan, that you shared throughout your presentation. Here's some nice little photos of animals. So I highly recommend these climate eco grief resources. The first one, Unthinkable Earth Resources, is curated through Britt Ray's team. If you don't know her, she's really well known in this space. It has everything from online eco grief support groups to different individual methodologies you can do to regulate your emotions around this, to podcasts, books, a whole list of environmental climate action groups you can get involved with. The Climate Mental Health Network is also really amazing. Resources and webinars from how to engage with children on this topic to how to work through your own climate emotions. Moving down to Climate Aware Therapy, here is a great website where you can find climate aware therapists all around the world. A lot of them, if they aren't in your location, they also do online sessions, so not to worry. And here are some local peer support groups right here on campus. If you're a student, check out U Calgary Climate Cafe on Instagram. They are a student-led peer support group where they're not going to try and fix your emotion, but just really validate how it can feel right now with the climate crisis. Here are some other U Calgary wellness services and supports for students, staff, and faculty, and anyone who might need crisis supports as well. So yeah, thank you everyone. I really appreciate all the work you're doing. If anyone is interested in connecting with the Mobilizing Alberta climate community here on campus, please contact us at mobilizing@ucalgary.ca. We can connect you with climate action groups on and off campus as well. So enjoy your day, everyone, and thank you so much.